You're about to listen to our live recording with Johnny C. Taylor, the CEO of SHRM, which we recorded in front of a live audience at the Alexandria campus of the College of Professional Studies at the George Washington University. Now, sometimes glitches happen, and unfortunately, our main audio feed didn't work the way we had hoped, so we're using our backup audio. But I think you will find that despite the audio not being quite at the standards we like, it is a great interview. Johnny is an amazing leader, and he left from our interview to go right to the Today Show for one of his next appearances. So I hope you enjoy the conversation with Johnny C. Taylor. Have you ever noticed that some of the best ideas come from unexpected places? Your next breakthrough may come from a leader facing similar challenges, but in a completely different sector. Welcome to Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Shop. Join us as we explore how today's successful leaders inspire, influence, and connect with others. Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver and the Communications Board, who have teamed up to spotlight how great leaders and communicators are making their impact in the world. This episode is brought to you by the George Washington University's College of Professional Studies. With in-person and online programs, ranging from master's degrees in public relations strategy to certificate programs in digital communications, GW offers more than just the credentials to help working professionals get ahead. It prepares them to be leaders in their field. As a proud GW graduate myself, I can attest that faculty members combine academic rigor with real-world lessons that can't always be found in textbooks. Check out cps.gwu.edu for more information. You know, if you want to know who makes things happen in Washington, you don't have to look much further than the alumni of the College of Professional Studies at GW. It's the Masters in PR, it's the Graduate School of Political Management, it's the Center for Public Leadership. And so you go to Congress, the White House, K Street, the Pentagon, you find those alumni there, and they're making things happen here. So they were the perfect sponsor for Chief Influencer, and we were just so grateful to have them in that role. To all of you who are here in person, we want to welcome you to Chief Influencer, the show that explores how today's successful leaders break through to inspire and influence others. Social Driver and the Communications Board have each helped great leaders and communicators make their impact in the world. So we decided to team up and spotlight some leaders. And I want to thank our executive producer from the Communications Board, Robert Kruger, who's here with us tonight. Thanks so much, sir. Over the last year since we launched this, we've been on a quest to identify leaders who are more than chief executives. They're chief influencers. We have featured a member of Congress, a top diplomat, an Oscar winner, an orchestra conductor, a reality TV star, the founder of a leading fashion brand, and more. And tonight, we are so thrilled to feature Johnny C. Taylor Jr., a dynamic, revolutionary leader whose thought leadership is shaping current and future generations of the global workforce. Johnny is the president and CEO of SHRM. As the voice of all things workers in the workplace, SHRM is the foremost expert, convener, and thought leader on issues impacting today's evolving workplaces. With 325,000 members in 165 countries, impacting the lives of more than 235 million workers and their families globally. And Johnny's career is incredible. It spans over 20 years as a lawyer, human resources executive, and CEO in the for-profit and nonprofit sectors. He's the author of the national bestseller, we have a copy of it here, Reset, A Leader's Guide to Work in an Age of Upheaval, a fantastic Wall Street Journal bestseller that challenges leaders to embrace change in the face of adversity. I loved reading it. I also did listen to it. And Johnny has been called many things. A valedictorian, one of Washington's most influential people, a member of Ebony's Power 100, best-selling author, Distinguished Executive of the Year, a trailblazer in gender equity and diversity. The list goes on and on. But today we are thrilled to call you a Chief Influencer. So welcome, Johnny.
Thank you. Wow, how was you doing? I will tell you the title that I hold most dear to my heart is Dad, though. I have a 13-year-old daughter who is top of my list right now, which is the only reason I'm going to run out of here when we're done today. But I'm so excited to be here, honored indeed, to get this opportunity to join time with all of you. This is amazing.
Well, thank you, Ray. Your daughter sometimes shows up on your social media. We're going to ask you about that in a little bit. But I would just love to start with your book.
Yes.
Reset, a leader's guide to work in an age of upheaval. You challenge leaders to think of those assumptions that we all have about workers and the workplace. You call them to take action. And it occurred to me reading this, people don't really like change too much. And it's what you ask people to do, you ask leaders to do. And I wondered if you could share what kind of reaction you have gotten from this.
So the funny thing about change I've found is that people like the word, but change in action actually scares people to death. Because the reality is most of us kind of like things to be constant. We like the world that we live in, and you get used to it, and you can plan accordingly, etc. So what we found is when we introduced the book, the concept of change, people were like, okay, got it, yes, right, until it started to happen. And frankly, I wrote this book while we were in the middle of one of the biggest change moments of our generation, and hopefully no other generation has to experience it, called COVID. We're sitting at home, and I jokingly had both of my kids, my son and my daughter, at home, and it's the first time I realized I love them, but I don't always like them. We were stuck in a house, there was nowhere to go, you couldn't go get coffee, you couldn't do anything, no restaurants, no movie theaters. So we were spending time together. It's interesting, this book, the working title was initially The Great Pause. Because if you all think back to March of 2020, our government leaders told us 21 days, 30 days, 60 days, let's just hunker down and we can control and eradicate this thing called COVID. Well, I'm at home with them, and about 60, 90, 180 days, it became clear that I was not going to be chronicling a pause. In fact, this was a reset moment. Because the funny thing about the pause was, if you think about your tape recorder, you push pause and you pick up just where you left off. Well, that's not what this was going to be. We were going to have the way our relationship would work. People were questioning if they wanted to work, from whom they wanted to work, what kinds of work, like everything, where we wanted to work, right? At home, remote, hybrid, work from anywhere, not just work from home, work from anywhere, was all being thrust. So all of this change happened, and I said, let me write the book about the Great Reset, because I tend to think, and our SHRM research proved this out, that when we come back, whatever back is, it's going to be significantly different, right? Right now, think about it, no one was working remote and demanding that they work remotely, right? We were trying to sort of really separate work from home and our work-life balance, so you didn't want to bring work home. Well, that's exactly what we did. We were forced to, in March of 2020, so we blurred the lines, and from that point forward, everything changed. Most importantly, and I'll tell you here, it was how people would agree to be managed going forward. Which, people management is very much an art and a science, right? Because human beings are these pesky little things that change. They say one thing and mean something and do something different. But we had to really get very, very much in tune with what our employees wanted and how they expected to be managed. That was the biggest takeaway that came out of Reset to me, is everything that we thought we knew as employment experts changed in March of 2020.
And we've all figured it out now.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
Got it.
I wonder, you're advising so many leaders on this. I know you're a go-to, they ask you, but what are some things that you've changed inside your own organization, SHRM, since March of 2020?
Wow. So the first is we're hybrid. And I must admit, I was one of those guys who said, you come to work every day, you work a long day, and that's how you decided to get promoted, etc., out of sight, out of mind, all of the closely held and long held ideas about how you work. You're not productive if you're not at work. And so we changed that. We now remotely worked Mondays and Fridays. We're in the office Tuesdays and Thursdays. And the idea was, Monday is the day we learned that everyone hated. Think about it. Sunday, you're like trudging the Monday doldrums, right? I don't want to do this. And so we said, what if we allowed people to come back to work on Tuesday? So sort of take the sting out of Monday. So that was it. Then I was really apprehensive about Fridays, because I said they'd just be long weekends and I would not have productivity. So we resisted that. So that's an example, is we started hybrid work, which was a big deal. The second, probably biggest aha moment, the biggest shift that we started to trust our employees more. And I think they're sort of related. This notion that the reason I wanted you in the office all the time was to ensure that you were working and being productive and giving me a return on my investment called your pay. And we had to literally let some of that go and trust that people would be adults, that we hire adults, not children, and that they would act responsibly and keep their part of the bargain. So we literally saw our trust barometer go up significantly post-COVID when people were coming back, because we said, you don't have to punch a time log. You don't have to prove to me that you're doing my work at any given time. I just have to trust that you're going to do right by the organization that's going to do right by you. Those are the two biggest observations in this period.
I want to talk a little bit more later about trust, because you can't influence people if they don't trust you.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
Some leaders seem to have a way of breaking through. You obviously do this very well in person for people who followed you. You speak to huge crowds with a great audience. You also, though, do it digitally on social media. LinkedIn recognized you as one of their top voices. You have nearly 500,000 followers on your personal LinkedIn page. When did you decide to prioritize your digital presence, your social media presence? Why do you think leaders should build their own personal brands? Does that play a role in trust?
Right. I made the decision, it happens to be in 2019, but more importantly, when I had something to say. Too often I find that people want to be famous for the sake of being famous. Like, okay, I actually am very much an introvert, so I have no desire to be out there in the media. But I decided that we actually had a responsibility. SHRM's responsibility was more than just to the HR profession. It was to HR, meaning human resources, people. We needed to elevate the importance of people in the workplace and get our leaders to think differently about this really incredibly rich talent called human resources. And so we decided we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it with all of its foibles, all its pluses, minuses, to really be honest about what it meant to value people. So we said, now we need to tell the story. So I joined SHRM in 2018, and a friend of mine, Roy Abdo, who happens to be in the room right now, who runs a firm called Digital Revamp, he sat down and he said, I want to make you famous. I said, I don't want to be famous. That's exactly what I done. And I can tell you a long story about walking into a store and someone walking up and debating. This mother and her daughter were there. They were debating whether or not I was Jake from State Farm or the guy from SHRM. I said, what? But I don't want that pressure. I want to be Johnny, anonymous, to just make a difference in the world quietly. Roy and his team said, that's not good. If you have something to say, especially if it's about making the world a better place, particularly work. 161 million Americans go to work every day out of 335 million people. And you're going to spend an inordinate amount of your time at work. So if you can make work better, then you can make the world better. And so I decided at that point, working with Roy and his team, to build a digital profile. And again, the really important message here is to do it just for the sake of doing it is ego-driven. But if you do it because you think you can actually make the world better, because you can introduce new ideas, some controversial, some not so controversial, if you can force people to talk with each other, talk to people who are different. I want to talk about that, hopefully we talk about diversity. Like if you do that, then it's worth doing and sort of trading off my desire to be very, very anonymous in life.
I think that's such a good point that you have to think about, well, what do you actually want to say?
That's right.
Because people may say, well, I want to be a thought leader. And it's like, well, what's the thought?
That's right.
And if they don't have an answer to that, that sometimes makes it hard to achieve that.
That's right.
What do you say to other leaders that say, well, I'm too busy to do this? Or I'm not good at this. I'm not a social media person, Johnny. What recommendations do you have for those? Because I know you see a lot of time with other CEOs that are probably looking at you and you're inspiring them and they're feeling that peer pressure that they need to do more.
Well, it goes back to that point. If you have something to say to make our society better, then you have an obligation to do it. So it's really not about me. And that's what I say is you have to make time for things that matter. When we talk about, for example, seeing all of our employees, knowing that they're valued, giving them, that means if you have an approach to doing that is not currently being practiced in the workplace, you have an obligation to do it. So the CEO's job is not what it was in times past. I came from a for-profit CEO role where it was return shareholder value, maximize shareholder value. That was very simple. And so you didn't have an obligation to make the world or the workplace any better. You just did your job, made your shareholders money, and you got a lot of money in exchange. Now we have a much broader remit. And it is actually to ensure that the place where people spend most of the time of their week at work is a good place, and it actually makes us better as a society.
When you think about the audience you're trying to reach on LinkedIn, is it people who work at SHRM? Is it members of SHRM? Is it the broader public? Who do you think of when you're working with a team to create content and get those messages out there?
Everyone. And it literally is. Now, your marketing folks will tell you about channels and personas and all of those. But at the end of the day, what our message is about, it could be talking to some 13-year-old girl who we want to understand what she can become. That, you're not in school trying to become a nurse if you actually have the capacity and desire to be a doctor. But the world has told you that women do this, men do this, black people do this, white people do this, straight people do this, gay people. Like, we think that when we're messaging, we want to message for the broadest of audiences because there's dignity in work. With the exception of people who are born trust fund babies, at the end of the day, we kind of have to work. So if you've got to do it, you've got to find a way to do it in a dignified way such that you get something out of it. So our audience is intentionally very broad. And it's actually very satisfying. I'm going down to Morehouse College, an HBCU, all men's HBCU down in Atlanta, to teach a course because some of their students heard us talking about on one of my many digital appearances how to be all that you can be, stealing from the U.S. military line, and saying, it's okay if you go to college, it's okay if you don't go to college, it's okay. Like, there's so many ways to maximize your human potential and actually find dignity in work. So they called me. That wasn't my intended audience. When I went out and said, let's deliver a message to black men in Atlanta, Georgia, Morehouse College, it was a broad message of you really can chart your own course to success. And it resonated.
One of the things that I think many people might observe about your LinkedIn, you can look in and see somebody's activity beyond just what they post. And you'll wish happy birthday to somebody who works at SHRM, or you'll comment on somebody who won an award. And I want to just hear a little bit about that. Sometimes people think social media is just about posting what you want to say, rather than joining other people's conversations and kind of giving them a pat on the back.
Right, so the one thing about social media, it's so big, right? As I said, I'm blessed, really, really blessed to have a 500,000 and growing audience. But people want to be seen, even in the virtual and digital world. And so if I know it's your birthday, for example, just to shout it out, if I see someone who presented at a conference and I say, hey, I heard you really nailed it from the other comments, I didn't have to be there. It's amazing how you can lift someone's day and their spirits by seeing them, literally, and recognizing them. And the most satisfying part of this gig is when I do it for someone I don't even know. And I send them a note, and they write back and say, I was having a really bad day, until you call that out. And just randomly doing that gives me such, you can probably sense, I got really heavy, heavy satisfaction out of it. And I also know that I made someone, you don't know what people are going through, my friends. You don't know who's a step away from making a very different decision in their life because they're in a bad place. And just saying kindness, when we talk about kindness and seeing people, that's one, I think, the upside of social media, if you do it responsibly, is you actually see people and get their feedback. Now, let me just say this. There are times when they're pretty mean on social media. I mean, social media can get pretty darn dark, and what we try to do on occasion is just to lift it up. So it's okay for us to disagree. I gave a talk just recently with the governor of Utah, and he has this great phrase, disagree better. So the notion that we aren't going to disagree with people is insane. Of course you are. Our diversity is our strength, and diverse people will see things differently by definition. But how can we do it better? And that's part of, again, the messaging. So when you ask, tying back to your earlier question, I'm talking to everyone. I'm talking to my employees. I want to make sure that we have a civil workplace and that you treat people with dignity and respect. I'm talking to people who don't work for us. I'm talking to our members. I'm talking to members down the street in Washington, D.C., on the U.S. Capitol. We're saying we all owe it to ourselves as society members to be better at this existence that we call human. Our life as we know it. Absolutely.
You mentioned, so this broad audience could be a 13-year-old girl. You gave an example. So I want to kind of lead into that for a second. A lot of leaders tell us they struggle to navigate that gray area between the personal brand and the professional brand. And I want to know how you balance that. Your daughter, for example, part of your personal life has been featured on your LinkedIn. And so what's your approach to that? What advice do you have for other leaders that are trying to navigate? Because you can't separate those in today's world like you used to be able to.
Right. Authenticity. You've got to be you at all times. And the people who I've even seen some people who have significant followers, millions of followers, but you don't know who they are. And frankly, I'm not so convinced they know who they are. So they put on a face online and that person shows up. Over time, that person will be figured out because it's kind of hard to not be you consistently. And so my advice to those leaders is it's okay to be you. We have to give people permission to be authentically themselves. And that person is the person who should show up on social media. Or if I'm at an event and I see the person, they should say, there's no space between the Johnny I'm seeing online and the Johnny. So today, classic, my daughter has an event, I gotta do something at 7 o'clock. That's called work-life balance, work-life integration, and I can't just preach it online and then in practice not make the time for those things that I tell everybody else on social media matters. I've got to live it. So authenticity online allows you to be authentic in life, and it's a much better life. So that's the key, is authenticity.
Yeah, makes sense. You kind of started talking about difficult conversations in the workplace earlier. So it's a really polarizing time right now in our country and in the world. What advice do you have for leaders about how to navigate those turbulent times, and particularly thinking about a workforce that has a bunch of people working together for common goals, but they disagree on a lot of stuff too?
And increasingly, they disagree on everything. I mean, it's amazing. So what we have to do is step back, and I talk about this in the context of diversity. We have all said for 30, 40 years in corporate America how important diversity is. Well, once you say that, by definition, that means you're going to interact with people who see the world differently, who experience the world differently, who have different points of view. You and we have to create an environment where, again, we can disagree better, where we can have civil conversations. And that doesn't mean you compromise on your values and those things that you believe, but respect that other people may experience life differently for any number of reasons. Where we are right now is it's not that you and I disagree, it's that you're bad, that you're evil for not agreeing with me. That is a very bad place for society, right? You can't build societies on that. So I'm very, very intentional about saying when we one of the ways that we approach diversity in times past is to focus on our differences. Well, my friends, that's not logical. The reality is, if I walk into a room and I've never met you, for example, I don't walk up and say, hey, how are we different? Nobody does that. I say, we should go to school. What are you majoring in? Where do you work? I'm trying to find those things that we have in common, not our differences. And I think what we have done over the last 3 or 4 decades is so focused on our differences, tolerating our differences. Look how much tolerating here, right? Actually embrace them and get to the point where our diversity is our strength, and that in doing so you acknowledge and expect that we're not always going to agree. That's okay. I think we have to give permission to people to not agree. And then, like I say, there's some requirements. I say at my workplace all the time, right across the street in Sharon, it's like, listen, you don't have to always agree, but you will be respectful. You will be civil toward each other. And if you don't, there will be serious consequences. We cannot exist as a culture, as a workplace, if people aren't civil toward each other, even and especially when you disagree.
One of the things I love about SHRM is that you're very focused on meeting the moment. We talked about how you did that, with your book, Reset, kind of helping folks navigate that pivot. And right now, you're doing a lot around civility, which is meeting the moment of what we're going through right now. Can you talk about what SHRM is doing around civility? Because I know it's a major focus.
Yeah, so here's the deal. Everyone sort of knows you're supposed to be civil, but our conduct is not playing itself out. I was talking to one of my colleagues, Amanda, and she said she's seen in the last 24 hours 2 people nearly get into a fist fight on the road, just road rage, just silliness. And so tensions are high. And we have begun to notice, the story is 2019, SHRM did some research, and for the first time, we started seeing the word toxicity, or toxic workplace show up. We assumed that data suggested that it would be on the basis of race and sex and national origin or something like that. In fact, it was people disagreed along political views and perspectives. And we were seeing data that said 1 in 10 employees have actually witnessed these really, really bad situations at work, and increasingly they're quitting because of it. It's not because of your manager, it's not because of pay, it's because of the people around you. The toxicity makes it not worth it. So, in short, we decided that was 2019, then COVID happens. Fast forward, 2020, the election, and we know how that worked out, right? Here we are 4 years later, and we're at the same point, and it's hitting fever pitch, and the data is telling us that people don't want to come to work because of the toxicity associated with people being uncivil toward each other. So we decided we've got to do something about it, and it's not enough to just say, be civil, because of course everyone knows that. What we got to do is show people how to be civil. So SHRM is committed to, one, encouraging everyone to engage in these conversations, giving them tools so that we understand how do you, in a workplace, take someone who's pro-Palestinian and someone who's pro-Israeli, how do you keep these people in the workplace at once? How do you do that? And these are the things. How do you get someone who's a BLM supporter and, name it a Proud Boy supporter? I don't know. And I may not be the greatest example, but you get my point, is diverse people in a workforce. That's what we said we wanted, right? Is a diverse workforce. And then when we got it, we didn't know how to manage it. So that's what SHRM is doing. We're going to force people, when we have them captive for 8 to 10 hours a day in a building or in front of a screen, and we're going to say, let's figure out how to be more civil toward each other.
When we think about the role a leader can play to influence their workforce, what do you tell leaders they need to do to model that?
Right. So first of all, we've got to equip leaders with the skills to do it. Because we make the assumption, you know the story, you're a good accountant, you do it long enough, you become the manager of accountants. We never teach them how to manage people. They just get promoted because. And so we have put people into management roles, people management roles, and we've not shown them how to be great managers. That's the first thing. But then the second thing is tell them you have an obligation to model that behavior. It's not okay for you to be mean-spirited towards someone else, or do as I say, not as I do. That doesn't work anymore. And what I'm really pleased to see is corporations are holding people managers accountable for that kind of behavior. You have to walk the talk. So we're saying, hold them accountable, but let's make sure that we give them the tools, the know-how to actually manage people, because it's really complicated. Managing human beings is more complicated than anything you can do because they're so mercurial, right?
You mentioned diversity, equity, inclusion a couple times. That's something that you're really interested in talking about. I'm going to ask you, a lot of leaders are telling me we really care about DEI, we care about ESG, but in some circles, those are four-letter words.
Yes.
We're feeling really concerned and we're worried about the backlash. We don't want to do the right thing and then that causes a catastrophe. So what are you telling leaders who are dealing with that challenge?
We're saying rethink diversity. The fact of the matter is, most of the construct, the way that we've thought about diversity, equity, and inclusion is, we did it in a very binary world, where you were black or white, old or young, male or female, Christian or not. It was very binary. Fast forward, the world doesn't work that way anymore. All of the assumptions that we made about it, so it was easier. Our construct was very much left or right, and we dealt with it in that context. Now things have been blurred a lot more. And people are intersectional, like on so many, you're not a black woman, you're a woman who's of mixed race, there's just a lot going on right now. And so we're helping redefine diversity for the 21st century. And for those of us who follow this book, it started as diversity, if you remember 30 or so years ago, and then it became diversity and inclusion. Then we added equity, then we added belonging. Now A for it's just going alphabetically as attack. And no one has said, let's go back. It's like building a house, I like to describe it, just adding rooms. As you have more children or more occupants, and it looks like children, it's done. And what did we just create? As opposed to starting back over and saying foundationally, what's the environment? What's the neighborhood like right now? And in this new neighborhood, how can we build a world of work that works for all? That's the Holy Grail. So it's actually less about diversity now and more about inclusion. We at SHRM changed the name of our conference from the Diversity Conference to the Inclusion Conference, because that is the real goal of it, is to take all of this diversity and make all of those people, it's a really important point, all of those people feel included. One of the challenges that we had, and again, I'm not being hypercritical of diversity 30 years ago, is we were very much focused on historically underrepresented groups. And so it was very much, let's right the wrongs of the past. Our country has an ugly history of how we treated women, how we treated blacks, immigrants, etc. So we were busy trying to make good on that. where now the environment is considerably different and you cannot engage in the very behavior that you complained about in the name of diversity. When we say inclusion, it's inclusion for white men too. You can't be in an environment where it's all about protecting just those who are historically underrepresented. So I take a very contrarian position on this, is when we say inclusion, it's inclusion for all. It's the only way it works, because if not, then it's going to be the haves versus the have-nots, and it will be tension forever. If we hope to get to a civil place, we've got to see everyone.
As we're talking about controversial acronyms, AI, I would love to know what you think. Obviously, people are worried about what's happening in the workplace, but particularly I'm thinking about how we build trust and influence as leaders and the impact of AI on that. I know other leaders are asking you about this. Let me hear your take.
Listen, it's ugly. If you think about the headlines, 300 million jobs, Goldman Sachs says, will go away on account of AI. All of us who spent the last several years going to coding classes just got a heads up from the CEO of NVIDIA who says, don't worry, the computer will do that now. It's like people are scared out of their minds because AI is an existential threat. We say people, two things present an existential threat to human beings: a threat to their lives and a threat to their livelihoods. And every headline today says AI is coming for your job. So we as leaders have got to change the narrative. Someone asked me the other day, is AI going to take my job? I said, no, someone who understands AI and can use AI is going to take your job. So it's not AI. The things that are uniquely human, that only human beings can do, higher order things. Yes, AI will change jobs and will meaningfully reconstitute a lot of the jobs that we know today. But just think back to the movie Hidden Figures, right? Remember, they called those women in that movie computers. They didn't call them human computers because there was no such thing as a machine computer. The machine computer came along, and they could have all, these were very highly educated mathematicians and statisticians, black women in the South, and they said, I'm going to learn how to fix the computer, program the computer, etc. I'm not going to just be threatened by the fact that this new technology has ushered in and it presents a threat to me. That's what we're saying to leaders today, is you've got to find a way to destigmatize and de-vilify, if there's such a word, this whole AI thing. It's going to make lives better. And if we do that and show human beings how together AI plus HI will equal the new ROI, then people will buy into it. But naturally, no one's going to embrace something that's going to make me unemployable. That's silly.
You're bringing an optimistic view.
Yes.
Are you encountering leaders or SHRM members that maybe are not feeling that optimism?
They are, because the media has played a really dumb and doozy on us right now. And so everyone's focused on the negative. What we do is highlight, for example, AI, in talent acquisition, as an example, recruitment. AI doesn't see a pregnant woman on the other side of the table when it's interviewing her. Human beings do. And all of their biases, subconscious, some unconscious, come to play in the recruitment process. So AI can actually help us make the world a fairer place from an employment practices standpoint. I have a scenario of this guy who's dyslexic. It's amazing what the technology can do that will allow him to not be weeded out for jobs, but in fact included for jobs, because that AI can help correct for that. The physician, for example, who spends most of her day transcribing notes at the end of the day. There's some amazing technology right now, AI-enabled, that will allow her to spend more time with her kids or more time with her patients, instead of at the end of an 8-hour shift, spend 3 hours transcribing notes. So what we've got to do is change the narrative and talk about the benefits of AI. But most importantly, we've got to be honest with people and say, guess what? AI may be coming for your job, but this is the new job that the future holds for you, and let's get you prepared. So it's lovely to be at GW today, because that's the role that higher educational institutions play. They can help people be prepared for the next job.
Yeah. That's a great segue to my last question before we maybe see if there's one or two from the audience. So we are here today at George Washington University's Alexandria campus, and I'm wondering what advice you have for future leaders just entering a workforce that looks very different from the ones that their parents experienced.
Yes, so that word that we started with is change. You got to get really comfortable with change. Literally, we used to see change happen in decades. It's now going to happen in 18-month periods. I remember when I first did business, we had 5-year business plans and 10-year business plans. We've thrown it out because you don't know what the world is going to look like 3-5 years from now. So getting very comfortable with that word change. I jokingly say I move the furniture in my house just for fun every 6 or 9 months because you do have to exercise that atrophy muscle. Like everyone says they want change, but if you don't practice change, I take different ways to work. There are little things that you can do to get yourself used to change. If I'm coming into the workforce right now, the notion that you can finish with an accounting degree and be good for the next 30 years is not only naive, it's dumb. Because it's not going to work that way. Everything that you know today will be significantly different 5 years from now. So, get very comfortable with change.
I'm thinking about that 5-year business plan from 5 years ago. Kind of hard to imagine that being helpful,
right?
Yeah,
that's right.
We have time, maybe 1 or 2 quick questions from people who are in the audience here. Does anybody have a question for Johnny? Don't be shy. Always takes a second for the first one.
I'll ask one, sure. Hey Johnny, Leslie. I actually work at Social Driver, and this is not planned, I promise. I was like trying to think of a question for you. So today, the DOJ took the stance on non-competes.
Yes.
And you all, like, I just saw on my phone, I'm sure got an email saying this is like the summary, and at the bottom you put SHRM's stance on where you feel on your stance on banning non-competes in the DOJ. And I thought that was interesting, and just how you even, I don't know, as a leader, how you come to that, I mean, I'm sure there's lots of data behind that, but you personally, what made you want to take that stance, and do you do that often, and is there any advice that you can give for folks for helping them to take that stance?
So that's a great question, and frankly, we dodged it historically, but now 3 or 4 years ago, we subscribed to a new tagline when it comes to our policy efforts, and it's SHRM is about policy, not politics. So the first thing you have to do is rise above any political conversation. You can't win because the country's so divided, so you can't win. So from a policy perspective, we actually have a big group of PhDs, biopsychologists, statisticians who do nothing all day but crunch real data and try to understand what will be the real life consequences of banning non-competes. And that was what served as the basis for us deciding to say a total ban is probably not the right idea, because what we know is 2 things will happen. One, get ready, you heard it here first. More and more companies will start outsourcing their work and creating contractor relationships, because you can enter into a contract with someone. It says you can't, the FTC's ruling now says that you can't require an employee to do it. But I can contract with any, and so guess what happens? A lot of you who are used to your jobs, we're just going to outsource that job. And you will have a contract relationship, which doesn't bode well for us. The other thing that will happen is for employees, we've said, for example, we want transparency. I want to know what's going on in my business. Why would I do that if tomorrow you go to a competitor? I won't do it. So what we're going to do is, I think business leaders, and they told us this, so this isn't just anecdotal, they've said, I'm going to be less transparent with my employees. Instead of coming in front of my employees and saying, this is the strategy for the organization, this is where we're going, if I think that simply could end up in the hands of my competitor, I'm just not going to tell you. So now you're working in the dark. You can't mobilize and get excited about the strategy because I'm not going to share it with you. So business will respond to this. The law and our lawmakers have an obligation. They will do what they're going to do. You've seen FTC, I think it will be fought in courts. You might imagine everything's fought in courts these days. But I will tell you that the concern is we work so hard to get employees and employers closer in together. And I worry that when you say just a total ban on something, that we employers will find a way around it. And net, it's not going to help the employee-employer relationship. I think it will further compromise it. But that's how we come up with this. We get a lot of data and say, okay, employer, what will you do if this happens? Because we've done all of the scenario planning. All of this anticipated that the FTC might go this way, the Supreme Court might go that way, You say, if this happens, what will you do? And employers have told us what they're going to do.
Mm-hmm. Johnny, we can go on for hours more, but I know we can't, unfortunately, so I just want everyone to join me in thanking you for being with us. thrilled to have you, and thank you for sharing and inspiring us. And we will all keep watching what you're doing on LinkedIn and elsewhere.
So where do you run it back? Thank you all so much. Enjoy my time.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Chief Influencer, a production of Social Driver and the Communications Board. If you know a leader who should be featured as a Chief Influencer, please nominate them at chiefinfluencer.org. For show notes and more, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn. Until next time.